Former President Thabo Mbeki blamed the country's energy crisis on Eskom's leadership. He was speaking to students at UNISA, invited guests too at a lecture at the university.
The leadership of Eskom at the time decided not to have what is called a 10-key project. Now, a 10-key project is, the University of South Africa says it requires a room as big as this, which must be able to seat 1,000 people, and they want it ready in 3 years' time, and they are prepared to pay so much. And then we put out a tender, and Thabo Mbeki Incorporated company, they win the tender. All of the university wants is that this company must produce this hall in 3 years' time according to the specifications. Now, my company, to whom it subcontracts, no, you must do the rails and you must do whatever. That's a business of the company. University wants a hall like this according to the specifications in 3 years' time. The leadership of Eskom did not do that, to put these 10 key projects. But it broke up the contracts into pieces. So that the contract from Ethiopia, instead of being one tender that goes out, you put out 20, 30 tenders for elements of this one contract.
Well, Professor Dirk Kotze joins us now. He is a professor of politics at UNISA. Professor Kotze, good evening to you and thank you for your time. Let's start with the conversation around Eskom. It is the dominant story this week because of the power crisis that we're in. The former President Thabo Mbeki talking about the leadership at Eskom now, saying we need to look at it, talking a bit about the history, but I suppose we shouldn't forget, as uncomfortable as it may be, this did start on his watch.
Yes, that is indeed so. And we know now, historically speaking, that during his time as president, an advisory opinion was given to the cabinet about the need in order to start to develop new resources for Eskom and to have a next generation of power plants. And their decision was that it's not necessary, it should not happen, South Africa doesn't need it yet. So if that could have happened at that stage already and the type of investments that could have been done at that stage, hopefully then this would not have been where we are today, working with outdated old plants. But I guess obviously the way in which he presents it is that the decision-making during the Zuma period, when the two Kusile and Medupi were planned, that was the real problem that we are facing today.
There was a long series of comments by the former President Mbeki. He seemed to be defending his track record on HIV and AIDS, repeating unscientific comments about the virus. Do you think he understands how the world has changed? He seemed to be defending his track record. I'm sure you'll remember the big fights around antiretroviral drugs at the time. We now know, of course, that allowing and introducing antiretroviral drugs in public hospitals increased life expectancy in South Africa by 9.5 years, and yet he's still defending his record.
Yeah, I think this is one of the weak spots in his political legacy. The other, I guess, is that about Zimbabwe. But this is something which he doesn't want to concede, that but his approach was the incorrect one, or that it caused this huge damage to South Africans in general. I think what is also surprising is that he uses exactly the same logic and the same arguments as more than 15 years ago about the relationship between HIV and AIDS. At the same time, what I always thought in the last 2 or 3 years is how would he interpret the current situation during the COVID pandemic and what we've learned, again, as a result of the virus, looking back at this period. And it seemed it has had absolutely no impact on, no sense of better understanding of public health and of the coronaviruses and pandemics and epidemics. So this was, in my view, quite an opportunity missed in terms of his responses today, that he didn't engage in it in a more critical way and a more sort of open-minded way than what he has done actually now.
His other big comment perhaps was about migration. There's a huge debate, as I'm sure you're aware, around the Zimbabwean exemption permit, which is now due to expire at the end of June next year. He said that it would be wrong for South Africa to be surrounded by an electric fence. How do you view that comment? How do you think it's going to be received in the huge debate around migration in our country at the moment?
Yeah, I think it reduced the debate actually to the period of the ANC in exile in African countries. And that has become his main argument, is to say with the expectation that was created when it around about 1990, he refers to what he did in 2005 already at the National Land Summit, of saying that Zimbabwe actually stood back in terms of implementing the land policy for the benefit of the South African negotiation process. So I think what he is saying is that we owe to these countries of Southern Africa and other parts of Africa because of the role that they played before 1990. But I think what he doesn't do is really, and then he refers interestingly to the Western Cape in a very positive way about how they've dealt with this Somali immigrants there. But he does not, or he did not engage this discussion about what is the current situation in places like Gauteng and others where the idea of xenophobia or the Operation Dudula is very widespread, and there's lots of sympathy or support for them, very much based on economic arguments and the uncontrolled way in which persons entered South Africa. So those elements were not engaged or were not addressed by him. And I think it's more of a, I would say, almost in sentimental way of looking at this issue rather than a very practical way. And that was from the beginning of his engagement today. He was urging what he called intellectuals, African intellectuals or impending intellectuals, in order to think more and to plan better and to be open-minded. And I think this is the type of things where what he is promoting should also apply to these issues.
Professor Dirk Kotze, I really appreciate the time. Thank you very much indeed. Professor of Politics at UNISA.